So hello you guys, welcome back to my channel. We are back with another chat interview style video today, and today's guest, oh my god. I think most people my age either grew up on Friends or found Friends somewhat later in life, and I am no exception to that. But one thing that always stuck out to me about the show was the fashion and the style, especially in today's day and age, especially now, because, you know, all these trends are coming back and you see an awful lot of like, get that style, or like dupes in terms of outfits from Friends. Now, my favourite was always Phoebe, because look at me. How could it not have been? But today I got to talk to the costume designer behind the show, the brains of the looks that you see, Debra McGuire. And yeah, we talked an awful lot about Friends and the looks and some of the inspos behind the things that we saw on stage. But Debra was also a fashion designer, consultant, a jewellery maker. She's pivoting into the world of writing. As of recent, she's bringing out a book. I think she said towards the end of the year. We get into it in the interview. I just love talking to creative minds like Debra, somebody who just has so much to offer the world and so much to do, and has so many different creative outlets to do it. And it was fascinating getting to speak with somebody who's as artistic and tuned into themselves as well, and into what they have to offer the world, you know. So a huge thank you to Debra for sitting and talking with me, for sharing some stories and some fascinating little tidbits with me. I always say it whenever I do these interviews. I've been doing this a while now, YouTube and content creation, and the interviews that I do are my favourite creatively. There's something about sitting and speaking with somebody who you admire their work, or you've been aware of them for years. I mean, I was looking at the looks that she created when I was like 4 or 5. That's nuts to get to speak to her after all these years, and that's outside of the other projects that she's worked on in later life. I mean, more recently, projects like Sonic, Murder Mystery, or The Morning Show. And it's always interesting as well talking to somebody who is so different to me. I mean, I'm from Ireland. I'm from Limerick, Ireland. That's where I live. You know what I mean? If I was to recreate a look from Friends, a Rachel Green look, and walk down the street, it's Ireland. You would have people pointing like, who does she think she is? And it's just fascinating to get to speak to somebody like Debra, who that's her life, that's her world, creating and putting these ideas to screen, hearing her takes behind things, and not just that, hearing about her life as well, living such a creatively varied life. I just always find it so fascinating to learn about the person behind the project. That, like with Debra, for example, yes, she's a costume designer, yes, she worked on Friends, which is probably one of the most popular TV shows of all time. But outside of that, learning about the person behind the art, behind the craft. And it's the same with any guest that I have on. It's like, yes, I'm drawn to you for a particular reason, project, thing I really enjoyed that you were part of, be it a director, costume designer, actor, composer. But like outside of that, I always want to try and learn a bit about the person, try and, you know, talk about things that they want to talk about, that they don't usually get to talk about in interviews or in settings like this. So yeah, that's a huge part of why I do what I do, why I love what I do. And yeah, Debra had some absolutely crazy stories, and I'm just very thankful that she agreed to sit down with me. It always blows my mind when people are like, yeah, I'll do an interview, I'll sit and talk to you. I'm like, thank you incredibly, but why? Just reminding you guys before we begin that I am the drummer in a band called Itarian. Of course I'm the drummer. It's the only instrument that would have made sense for someone as chaotic as myself. But we put out a new single called Monument. It's on all streaming platforms. It's actually the first single that I'm featured on. So it was my first experience in a recording room. It was my first experience recording. So it was nerve-wracking. It was pretty nerve-wracking, and I'm very proud of how it turned out. It was mixed by Mark Saunders, who has worked on a lot of the Cure stuff, some Depeche Mode, and that is just crazy coming out of my mouth, let me tell you. So yeah, if you want to hear what your girl sounds like in Behind the Kit, be sure to check us out, all of our streamings, Apple Music, Spotify, all that's linked down below, and our socials linked down below. I'll also link all of Debra's socials down below also, if you'd like to go follow her, keep up with what she's doing online. I can't wait to check out her book. We talk about it later in the interview, but she mentioned bringing out, I think it was 2 books she talked about, and I can't wait. So yeah, if you want to keep up with her, myself, the band, whoever, all links are in the description down below. I hope you guys enjoy, and here is my interview. Okay, so I guess just to start things off and to ease us in, do you have a moment that you can pinpoint as being I want this to be a career, and it could be a viable career path?
Well, I've had 3 careers, and everything has been extremely organic. I'm an artist. I was born an artist. I started designing for my dolls when I was 6 and 7 years old, and got a little toy workable sewing machine when I was little. And so I was always into that. But then life took its course and things changed as the world changed. And I grew up in a time in the 60s of a lot of political discourse, and my path took a very political turn. So the idea of dealing with physicality and beauty and clothing was kind of a turnoff to me. So I went very much into a fine art direction, which is what I studied in college. And so, no, I sort of got off that path for quite a while. And it's just so interesting how life has a plan for us, I think. So, through coincidence and happenstance and synchronicity, my path turned into being a jewelry designer, which came from a project I did for a gallery as a painter, where I did a piece of jewelry that it was a show in San Francisco for painters who they had asked us to create a piece of jewelry. And so that launched into a whole career that lasted for almost 20 years. And and then in the course of that, a lot of situations happened where I worked with a dance company in Europe as a hobby. They were friends of mine to do some costumes for them, and never thought that that's what I would do. To me, it was like making sculpture.
Mm.
And then, yeah, I ended up being a costume designer. So I've been doing this now for 36 years, I think. So
So it feels like it kind of called to you then. You
I
you
think so.
opened up.
I think so. I think I it was a natural progression, I think. And I think, the advice I give to young people always is, not to sort of define your path, but to keep yourself open to the world and to people, and to not be afraid to put yourself out there and to talk to the person sitting next to you on a subway, or, you never know when those unbelievable coincidences and opportunities happen. If you're not open to them, they're not going to happen.
But I think any sort of career, we're talking about the arts. I mean, I do reviews, YouTube, all that kind of stuff, but I'm also in a band. I'm a drummer in a band. And I feel
Ah,
like as soon as you tell someone like that you're kind of more into the creative side of things, you get hit with the hundreds of questions, you know? And so for you, having led such like a creative life, did you find that your close circles, say, were supportive and have been supportive throughout?
oh, always, always. I mean, growing up, my parents were very supportive of my creativity. My mom used to drive me quite far to go to the museum. There was a museum school downtown in Cleveland, Ohio, and she would take me there for lessons when I was quite small. And there were some galleries that I loved in Cleveland. There was a Japanese gallery that I was very attracted to, and she would take me. And yeah, my parents were very supportive of my artistic career. And I look back, I mean, for my father, I think it was a bit misogynist because he dealt with me quite differently than with my brother, where I don't understand why I wasn't academically challenged in the same way, even though I was quite academic. It was more like, I think in his mind, oh, well, she's just going to get married and have children. So art school would be great for her. I'm not sure that it was with the same intention that I had. Um,
Yeah.
but I think, he got with the program eventually.
I guess when he saw it starting to work out for you was when he,
Yeah, it kind of
oh,
worked out. Yeah.
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 Um, and in terms then of costume designing, I would imagine that scripts or character studies could play such a huge part in dressing or shaping not just a character, but their personality as well. And for you, how much of that is taken into consideration when you're beginning to build somebody up from the beginning?
It's what it's all about. We are not my job is not to assert my own ego into a project. I have a very definitive style, which if you look at all my stuff, you kind of can tell that it's mine. However, my goal is not that. My goal is to work with the director and make sure whatever their idea of these characters are and the visuals, that I can interpret that for them.
Mm.
Not that I'm going to design something and they're going to, agree or not agree to it. So the writing of the script is what is my directive. And then I have to get inside the director's head and the writer's heads and sort of figure out what it is that I'm interpreting.
And do you usually have, because I spoke with Cynthia Summers previously, and it was fascinating hearing the insight behind like the building of wardrobes and whatnot. Do you have kind of like a wardrobe of your go-to like materials or base pieces that you can start sourcing from when you are beginning a journey with the character?
No, I don't start from anywhere. My whole theory is the art of the of not knowing. Not knowing is where I start from. I don't know anything when I begin. I'm really open to the moment. So no, I mean I'm very fabric driven, and color driven, but that's not what this is about, really. If I'm doing my own thing, that's got its own course of action.
Hmm.
If I'm interpreting somebody else's world, that has a whole other that has to be you have to start with nothing.
Yeah, I'd say so too. Otherwise, you risk projects kind of bleeding together.
Yeah, I mean, you have to be very careful about having a point of view. You have to really erase your point of view because it's not about your point of view. It's really about something else.
We have to talk about Friends. I, like so many other people my age, I was raised with the show. My parents, I had quite young parents, and it was just routine that they would watch it every single time it was on. So I kind of fell into it from there with them. And then as I grew up and grew older, I found myself going back to it as a comfort show and rewatching it through my teens, rewatching it through my early 20s. Like a show like that, a decade on air, the amount of fashion trends that was cycled throughout the seasons. Do you find that in terms of just fashion cycles or micro trends, do you find that it's much different today than it was back then, or that there are much of a muchness?
Yeah, it's completely different. I mean, I was in a bubble, you have to understand. I could care less about the rest of the world. I didn't really care what other people were wearing. I certainly didn't watch television. I had no interest whatsoever in anything, even the medium of television. I was only interested in my reality, which was being with, trying to figure out every week what six actors were going to wear.
Mm.
I wasn't interested in trends. The clothes at that time were very big and oversized. I hated them. I hated the 80s clothes, which kind of bled into the 90s. This was a new medium for me. I had gone from being a painter to doing this. So I decided I was going to deal with it like a painting because it is. We've got the television is a two-dimensional surface. So it's like looking at a painting. So how do we make something subliminally look beautiful? And, I wasn't doing character by character because most of the time the six of them were together. They had to look good together. They had to look good in the space that they were in. Um, so there were many, many things to consider. It wasn't like just about the clothes. And each scene had to, be very specific to what the intent of the writing is for that particular scene in terms of the interactions. What is the humor? We don't want to tip off the humor by having something that might be too bold or broad. Um, we worked very closely with the writers, and then Marta Kaufman, one of the producers, was the one that would approve the wardrobe every week. And she was very helpful in terms of really letting us understand what the intent of the joke might be or the interaction, things that maybe I wouldn't have thought of. So in that room with her in the end, when we would figure out the exact clothes, that was also a learning experience for me because I got to be in the writer's head. which was a great learning experience. And in 10 years of doing that, I think I learned a great understanding of how to interpret comedies specifically. Did that answer your question? I can't even remember what your question was.
Yeah, but you touched on something that's a question I wanted to ask. You mentioned specifically in scenes where you have to suit the costuming to the scene, and it just it brings up moments like the holiday armadillo, or the Halloween episodes where we're dressed in a Superman or Supergirl, or like the Delta Dawn shirt, for example, as well. And for you, that must be different to just straight up dressing somebody because it's more of a costume driven scene or episode. Do you have a favorite moment in regards to those kind of more offbeat moments?
Oh, there were so many. I mean, the writers were our friends, so they wrote into the costumes a lot. And at one point, I think after the first couple of years, I had to like talk to them and say, "I know you love us, but I can't do like 9 script days um, in each week from Monday to Friday to do 9 script days. 9 times 6 is 54 costumes, and then you've got three guest stars with three changes each. And that's, we're getting up to 72 costumes in a week and a half hour on television. So, it was a lot. So things calmed down a little bit as we progressed through the years. But in the beginning, it was kind of, I didn't know any different. So it was just wild and wonderful, but it was pretty crazy.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. And with those scenes as well, there's so many extras. It's
Oh, so
very
many.
it's
Yeah.
very rarely just the main
Yeah.
cast. The scenes are
Yeah.
packed.
Yeah, there were a lot of people. But for those things like the armadillo, we worked with someone who was so talented. I think his name was Dave White. His last name was White. It's been a minute. But so talented, so talented. He ended up doing things in my personal fashion world also to build things for me. Um, yeah, you could just imagine anything, and his skills of building these costumes were amazing. And even, for the bellies, for the pregnant bellies, and because for Jennifer, I mean, you see them, with midriff, you
Yeah.
see the bellies. So there was such artistry in all of these craft elements that we did, and that was really fun. And I love collaborating. So anytime I have to work with a craftsman, I love learning a new skill and doing things. Yeah, yeah, it was really fun, and it opened up my world. For example, working with these people, like I did a project where I had to build these amazing fashions for this project, and I needed to do the jewelry, and it was for a car company. So I had him cast tire treads in rubber, and I made necklaces and bracelets in the rubber and then put diamonds in the treads. So it was super cool, and I don't think I would have even thought about it had I not learned about what he did and what the possibilities were for what we could create. So it was great. So it was a great learning curve for me too.
It's crazy that you bring things like that up because it's so easy to forget that it isn't just costuming. It's not just pick a top or pick a dress that looks nice, that there's so much more that goes into it.
There's so much, and even like Ross and the leather pants. I mean, the
Mm.
physicality is really, it's a big deal, and having to have enough multiples for everything. And yeah, it's hard to imagine. I mean, it's funny, there were some people I would meet, would say, "Oh, you did Friends. Oh, didn't they just wear jeans?" And I can't tell you, it was like inside of me, I'm like, "They just wear jeans? Excuse me?" Oh my God, I just want to explode. It's like, no, we had to come up with sometimes 70 costumes. Or how about in the Thanksgiving episode where we had 7 time periods,
Oh
where
my
we
God,
had to
yeah.
do, 70s, 60. I mean, the Civil War, Phoebe's arm blows off. It was pretty out there. It was pretty out there. I mean, when you really think about it. I mean, her arm got blown off.
Yeah.
Okay, she was a Civil War nurse in a show like Friends. Like, That's pretty crazy.
But like, it's not, I mean, if you're not looking for it, maybe you won't see it and you would think just jeans or whatever. But like, you had episodes where you have the three girls, the three main leads, just sitting around in wedding dresses, for God's sake. You know what I mean? Moments like that that are so ingrained into my brain. I mean, yeah, the first time we see Rachel, she's in a wedding dress, isn't she?
Yep.
Which, by the way, I adore. I love that first wedding dress because it reminds me of the one that my mom wore. It is
Yeah,
almost
it was
identical.
80s. That
Yeah.
was an 80s wedding dress.
For you then, though, is that a rough starting point? A rough jumping off point into a character where you're faced with a wedding dress before you know anything about them?
No, I pulled that wedding dress from Warner Brothers stock.
With the others, then, well, I guess they were a bit later into the show, right? Like
Oh
Phoebe.
yeah, we that would never happen after that. But in the beginning, that's what we did, we used that costume house at Warner Brothers where we were. And I mean, we shopped for the clothes, but we would always go to the costume house first, and they would have period clothes. So we could pull an 80s, if we had to go backwards, we had a whole section of things that we could pick. We got a lot more sophisticated as the years went on in terms of building stuff. And
Yeah.
but at that point it was, 10 years is a long time. There's a big evolution.
Yeah, and you see it particularly through my favorite in terms of costuming and styling was always Phoebe. I just loved it. Everything about her visually just embodied who she was as a person. And I always gravitated towards that more kind of maximalist, frills and jewelry hanging off every finger and crazy earrings. But when building her, you mentioned that you were also into jewelry. Did you have anything to do with the jewelry, with
Oh
costumes?
yeah, I had a lot to do with the jewelry. Well, first of all, we had big containers of my jewelry, lots of my jewelry from, the 80s, because I was a jewelry designer in the 80s and 70s, 80s. And but I knew so many jewelry designers, so that was really fun. And I was really into it as an art form. So if there was an up and coming designer or somebody that I met or saw a piece in a gallery, and I might follow who that person was. And the person I worked with at the time, Nancy Gould, we both really loved going after the most interesting jewelry designers that we could find, and that's all over the world. So we did a lot of that, and there was a lot as the years progressed that we felt was important to encapsulate. I knew that we were after seeing after season 3, I knew we were going to start archiving all the clothes and everything. So I really wanted the archival to be indicative of sort of this time period that what we were creating. So I was very conscious of that. So sometimes I would even buy things that we might not ultimately use, but that might define that period that we were creating. And that was true of clothing, shoes, handbags, jewelry, etc.
It is like a time capsule though, because I was lucky enough. I went to the Friends Experience, which is like a traveling exhibition, and it was so crazy being so close to the pieces. And I also saw the Delta Dawn shirt, the other one that Monica wears singing Delta Dawn. I was in LA. And again, just seeing them up close, it's crazy the amount of detail and intricacies put into them. But it is like a time capsule. But Phoebe, I always did. I absolutely loved her. I know Rachel is the absolute darling of the show. Everyone loves Rachel Green's style. And seeing her go from the kind of spoiled, clueless 20-something-year-old to this accomplished businesswoman, seeing it reflected visually through her clothes is probably the thing that I like most about her character. The I got off the plane outfit was my favorite. Always. Always. That was always my favorite. But there's TikTok accounts and Instagram pages completely dedicated to Rachel Green's looks.
Yeah.
The look, recreate the look, dupes here. How do you feel about things like that, that after all this time, the people are still trying to recreate specific looks?
I think it's sort of a sociological phenomenon. And I didn't really realize to the extent until I started traveling to Eastern Europe and to places that you never would imagine would have the kind of impact. Like I would be in Slovakia I was at a film festival. I taught a master class there a few years ago, and I mean, the kids were just like, everyone wanted to talk to me. Like they were like, yes, that's what we grew up with, and that's how we learned English, and blah, 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 blah. And I was fascinated by the idea of like Romania and Russia and Croatia, that people there watched Friends and grew up with that. And I had people say things to me like, I learned not just about fashion and about decorating, and I loved the way the loft looked, and
Mm.
but I learned about social cues, about being with friends, and socially what's appropriate and what's not. And I learned what it was like in America and what the American reality is. And I found that just fascinating, especially in the Eastern Bloc where these kids were raised with communist parents,
Mm.
their whole frame of reference, they are not certainly not communists, but their parents still, that was their reality. So I just found the whole thing of having that culture drop into a television in a country that had never been exposed to anything quite like it. But I will say that the downside of that, it used to be when I was designing shows and wanted to show young people in Germany or young people in Russia or what young people looked like in different parts of the world, they looked very different from each other.
Mm.
And what happened with the internet and with being exposed to shows like this, young people started looking the same no matter where they were in the world.
Yeah, because the trends.
Yeah, I mean, it was really amazing. So that's a big cultural difference because there used to be a real defining character about what people looked like, you know. I just recently did big film that takes place at the end of the Cold War in Russia. And I love doing the research because there was even in the music world and the bands, and there was such a real sense of their culture in the way that they looked, even if it was like trying to be punk or whatever, which had, penetrated into some of these places, there was still a uniqueness about what each culture, the imprint that it had on young people. So that's a big change. That's a big difference. And maybe that's why there's this yearning towards Friends, towards this 80s and 90s. And, because the people who are discovering it now weren't alive in the 80s and 90s. So for them, it's like oh, wow, this world was so cool.
Mm.
And, I want to look like them. And I also think that the age group that's attracted to it has gotten much younger. My daughter was born 3 days before I started the pilot. Okay. So she's 31 years old. When I took her to Friends, she was 3 days old. My son is 5.5 years older. So by the time that I'd say he was junior high, high school, and Thursday nights, he would have a gang of friends over at the house to watch it. So that was like 15, he was 15. I think people start watching it now when they're like 9 and 10,
Mm.
which I don't think it's appropriate, but I think that's the truth. And I think that so there's this constant discovery happening with every generation. And, I still get emails because on my website, it has some information of how to get a hold of me. And I still get emails. I mean, to this day, and some of them are like, where can I get blah, blah, blah? And I'm like, oh, honey, that's 30 years old. I don't know where you can
Yeah.
get it. It's so cute. But yeah, some of them don't realize that it was 30 years ago.
Shops are probably closed where it came from. Doesn't exist
And
anymore.
truthfully, one of my favorite stores was in London, where I bought a lot of fabulous things for Phoebe and Rachel and Monica. and it was called Idle London. It was amazing. It was a small shop, and it was interesting because I had a shop also, and my shop really mirrored the way their shop. It was very similar. So I just loved these women in their shop. And then, they've been gone for a really long time, but I used to be able to tell people to, well, go to Idle London. It's fabulous. But it's been gone for probably 20 years.
Yeah, it's sad because I love those kind of little hidden gems, those little tucked away shops. I worked in retail. I did years in retail. I worked in a small independently owned clothing store in Limerick anyway, the city centre. It's so hard for renters to keep shops open. Rent's getting higher and footfall then.
Everywhere,
Yeah,
everywhere. I mean, it's unbelievable. I really, everywhere I go, I'm like, "Ugh, the shops are closing." And yeah, we're definitely going through a transitional period with everything.
I saw on TikTok actually recently this thing came across my page and it was like fall inspo outfits and it was a picture of Rachel in the little grey mini skirt and the knee-high boots and I was like, yes, I've seen that 100 times. And the very next slide was Primark have gotten in the Rachel and it was like I would think it was like a beige version of the skirt. And people were going feral over the skirt trying to recreate it. So I was just wondering what your take was in terms of that like the longevity of those pieces. It's crazy.
No, it is crazy. Yeah, I never ever could have anticipated that that would have that kind of impact. Yeah, I mean, I had a one of my favorite stories. I was friends with many, many years ago. I was friends with Tom Ford and his partner. And during Christmas, uh, we were texting. And this was not that long ago, right prior to when his partner passed away. And he said, "I just want you to know that Tom and I watch Friends every night, and he wants you to know that the clothes have held up really well." And I was
Wow.
like, okay, I almost had a heart attack.
Oh
I
my
was like,
God.
okay, Tom Ford thinks the clothes have held up really well. That was like the biggest compliment I ever could have gotten. Amazing. And then there's a thing in Alexander McQueen's one of his big books in the intro where he talks about being influenced by friends. I was like, what? What?
I forget that you must be a fan of people too, the same way people would come flocking to you with, where did this come from? Or, where'd you get your ideas from? You're the same.
Well, the truth is, I know this is hard to believe, but I know I've designed fashion and I'm in fashion but those are not my gurus. I don't, it's fine art. It's artists that I'm gaga.
What kind?
Contemporary art, and yeah, that's where I can, like, lose it. I mean, when I was in New York, I was quite young, and a friend of mine worked for the Dia Foundation in New York, and we got invited to the Picasso exhibit in New York City. And we went to that exhibit, and I think every artist in the world that I was a fan of was there. And I ended up walking through the whole show with Robert Rauschenberg and John Cage. And it was like, I just couldn't believe. I was walking through the show with them. I was between them. I don't think I ever said a word the entire time. I was just listening to them. And I was like, I never had an experience like that in my life. Those were all my gurus. They were all in one room the whole night. So and that's where my inspiration really comes from, is really the world of fine art. And I get so much joy out of that. Fashion is just an offshoot of that. And there are designers that I like, but I don't know. It's just that's not my motivation. I'm not a person that ever I don't look at fashion magazines, and I could care less what they're doing, really. I mean, for work, for research, I will, of course, look at things, and I have to put boards together and blah, blah, blah. So I'm very aware of what's going on. Now I watch the shows on my computer as soon as a season, so that I know, because I still design Jennifer for the morning show. So I really have to be aware of, what's happening out there. But it's not a passion. It's more an interest. I think that's a big difference.
I think it's smart, especially within the creative world, to keep your passion separate from your job. They can overlap at times, but drawing inspiration elsewhere, I think, is always beneficial to the creative process. I mean,
Yeah.
I like art. My one of my favorite painters of all time is Van Gogh. Of all time has been since I was a child. And it's funny you bring up New York because I have family there and my mom brought me, I think it was the MoMA. She brought me in to see they had a completely different art piece that I was studying for school, Le Demoiselle d'Avignon. So I was like, I have to see this in real life. I'd only ever seen it in a textbook, and it was this size in the textbook. So I'm looking for a tiny painting, turn the corner, and it is larger than life. I was like, my art teacher never taught me this. But I turned the corner and came face to face with Starry Night, and just in the middle of the room, Phil de Torres just burst into tears that I was that close to something that was that stupidly stunning. But yeah, like music and like video creations and stuff like that, it's all worlds apart from art itself. So I think I always love hearing where creatives pull inspiration from because usually it is the same kind of world but a different offshoot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, my world is very nonlinear. You know, I was a hippie for 10 years. I dropped out and lived on the top of a mountain, so
Wow. I
yeah.
wasn't
And I was
expecting
I,
that.
I was just up there for a 70th birthday party this weekend, the same part of the world. It's up in Mendocino County. And I had just these amazing memories of being up there. And yeah, I had a very serious meditation practice for 10 years that I've carried with me to this day. I think in retrospect, it's really the main reason that I was able to accomplish so much because I have a practice. And that's also a big part of my book that I write about for young people that, these things just don't happen, that we have to find our center and ourselves. And every day before we jump into the world, we have to have a moment or moments to reflect and to sort of relate to the soul part of ourselves before we go out into the world. And I've done it now for almost 50 years, and I don't know that I could have accomplished what I accomplished if I didn't have a practice. I don't think I could have. So, yeah.
Something to keep you centered.
Yeah.
You mentioned your book, and I just wanted to touch on that for a few moments because that's a different creative outlet entirely. How did that come about for you? How did the idea?
Well, I've always wanted to, well, from the time I did Friends, I've always been approached to do a book. Okay.
Mhm.
And everybody wants the Friends book. And I didn't want to do the Friends book because my life is so much bigger than Friends. It's not Friends. My life is huge. I'm 73 years old. I've had an incredibly full life. And so I felt like in order to explain what Friends, how that happened for me, you have to understand the context of really of my life. So I decided that I wanted to write a memoir, and I thought the best way to write it would be to tell stories, like all the stories of my life, starting from the beginning. So I have like 87 stories of synchronicity and coincidence, basically, is what the theme of it is. I don't know that I'll be able to sell that book as a memoir because that's not what publishers, they're not good at that. So I'm recreating this book to be more of a visual storytelling of, using drawings and photos and little stories here and there, and not in continuity. I don't think I wrote the book from 1952 to the present, but I don't think that's how the book is going to go. I think it's going to right now I just finished my proposal and it jumps all over. And so it's all collages and then the stories jump. So the whole thing is like a big collage, but it's about the creative process and about the art of not knowing really, because, we have to start with not knowing before we can know anything.
Mm.
And then, there are so many people that think they know everything and they're going to limit themselves in terms of like what the possibilities are out there. So the book is that. and it's going to be very visual. But then the other book came in an interesting way. I have a friend who's a producer, and we've been really close for about 65 years. I've known him my whole life. And he's a big producer, but he does more low budget art films. He's quite famous, but he is in a different world. And he thought it would be interesting because he had so many questions to ask me about my world. And so we've done a book of just interviews. We spent 3 days together, 8 hours a day, and we just like jammed through questions. And then my son was there. He works for me. So he was able to interview him because he has a different perspective. And then I think he's also going to interview Joe, who's here with me, who's been with me for 25 years, and Kathy, who's no longer with me, but was with me for 20 years. She now designs Post Malone and all these musical amazing people. So she's had a second great career, which I'm so proud of watching. But I thought it would be interesting to do those interviews as part of the book. That book is being published by a film publishing. So it's a publishing company that does specifically film related books. And that might be out by the end of this year, which would be fantastic. So yeah, so I took well 7 months off of work. I tried writing the book many, many, many times over the years. In fact, I've written 2 or 3 books. Um, but I've been so busy my whole life that everything would get distracted and sidetracked. And then the books that they always wanted me to write are not the books I wanted to write. I
Mm.
think when Bobby Brown wrote Bobby Brown's Book of Beauty, that the publishers wanted me to do a book about friends, and I'd never wanted to do that. So hopefully I'll get these into the world before too long because I have a lot to say.
Yeah, it sounds like you have some, I mean, from what you've told me so far, I'm still hung up on the fact that you literally brought life into the world and 3 days later we're on set.
And
What?
I was 42 years old. Yeah. So I was already a grown up, which was, I think, part of the wonderment of, because they were so young. Jennifer was 24, they were young and precious, and it was just interesting to have been that close to their evolution. It was
Mm.
really interesting. Yeah. And I'm glad I was that much older that I could, I think that's why I could hold it the way that I was able to.
You mentioned earlier as well working on Jennifer with some from some later projects. I think it was Murder Mystery and The Morning Show. When you work so closely with an actor or an actress like that, does personal preference come into it in terms of the actor's style and taste?
Well, first of all, my relationship with Jennifer, believe it or not, is 31 years, but it's very, very professional. We love each other, but there's definitely, it's professional. And there are times when her personal taste might want to, and sometimes I have to remind her that, it's not Jennifer, it's Alex.
Mm.
But Jennifer's overall taste from, starting from what was learned from those old days is this very elegant, classic, um, sophisticated in her on-camera looks. She knows exactly how she wants to look. And I get that. And I know that. Like if you look at the choices she made for red carpet over the years, she's never made a bad mistake. And you can't say that about anyone.
Yeah.
Everyone's sort of like had a bad hairdo or had a bad this or not Jennifer. I joke around and say, Jennifer has a PhD in Jennifer.
Mm.
She really knows her physicality and what is best. And so, because I've been with her for so long, I know what she thinks and what she likes. And does that inform me? Yes. But then again, like if she's playing a character or like in Murder Mystery, of course she's going to let me lead the way, which she does.
Mm.
Um, but for something like the morning show, it's so the way it's this elegance that is just, it's wonderful. It's beautiful. The palette is very refined, I would never put her in pink, for example. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I guess if the character required it to be, I wonder how that would go. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I just wondered because I know sometimes it must be tough to try and separate the two personal preference. Like you said, that you wouldn't put a character unless it was a true character into
Yeah,
something bold or
yeah.
colorful if it doesn't suit the vibe.
Wanderlust was interesting because, but Jennifer also really knows how to wear jeans
Yeah.
and be casual. I mean, in her personal life, she's a very casual girl
Mm.
and she can throw a t-shirt and jeans on and, that's it. So Wanderlust was sort of, it was like, the hippie house and she's going from being this New York sophisticate to living on a commune. That was really, really fun. And the clothes were great, cut off jeans and Ralph Lauren ponchos.
And for you then, what draws you to a project initially? Because in terms of like styling and costuming and stuff, the projects you've been a part of have been quite varied. Is there something that draws you to it initially?
Absolutely. It's not the project. It's just the people who are in charge. If my career would look very different if I was going for the stars and I was going for the moon and I was going for the big directors and that's not where my head is at. I hire people who become family. I had to leave my kids my whole life. So you better believe that the people I hire are people that I want to be around. So that's why most of the people that work for me were with me their whole lives, their whole, from college on. And like Joe, who's here with me 25 years. I mean, Joe's wife used to work with me. His father worked with me. He had 4 children that were born on our truck. I run my entire world like family. And it's just interesting, I had to leave my kids my whole life, but my son works for me now and he just wants to be with me. So I've had the ability to have this second life with him, which is so fantastic. Um, but yeah, I work for directors. I used to work for directors that I liked, but now I only work for them if I love them, pretty for the most part. Like the project I'm working on right now, where you see this behind is Super Troopers 3. I did Super Troopers 2, and Jay Chandrasekhar I met when he directed an episode of Freaks and Geeks, and he was quite young. I don't even know if he was 30 yet. And we've been close ever since then. And so I do a lot of his projects. And the big movie I did last year, which isn't out yet, called Mayday, was directed by Jonathan Goldstein and John Francis Daly. John Francis Daly was my little boy on Freaks and Geeks, and he came up to hear on me. And now he's 6'4" and, you know, married with 2 children. And then his partner is Jonathan Goldstein, who grew up in my hometown of Beechwood, Ohio. And so these boys are like my kids, I love them so much. So I do all their movies. So that's kind of how it works in the Debra McGuire world. And my agent is so funny because she's like, I know you like this person. Is this something that might interest you? And I'm like, no, no, I like them, but I don't like them enough. Because, you have to give up,
A
you know,
large chunk
I,
of time.
yeah, sometimes a year of your life.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to go out of the country for a year or, it's a big commitment. So you want to be with people that you want to be with. And at this point in my life, I don't really have to work anymore. So I'm only going to do what I really want to do.
That's a great position to be in.
Yeah. Well, it took 73 years to get here, but I got here.
That's so gorgeous that your team around you is like family. It's rare as well. That's not something you come across often. But yeah, look, I've taken up enough of your time. One question before I let you go.
Sure,
The
sure.
fact you've had so many career shifts, you've had so many different focal points from costuming to jewelry making to this new venture you're going to undertake with your writing and your books. Do you have a highlight so far that you can pinpoint as a personal best for yourself?
My personal best was being able to take care of my parents in their final years. It was the best experience of my life. Um, and dressing my mother for eternity was really a trip because we buried her in all these beautiful clothes that I made and uh, gold sparkle nail polish and
Hmm.
so yeah. Creatively, they were my most creative endeavor, I think, taking care of my parents. And I was quite busy, so they were always the priority. And yeah, in terms of projects, I don't know. I have favorites. Walk Hard was definitely a favorite because we did 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, up to present day.
Every
And
decade you could possibly fit on a screen.
that was incredible. And we thought when we were making that movie that we were making the greatest movie ever made.
Hmm.
We were wrong, but that's how we felt. We really felt like we were the luckiest people in the world to be making this movie. And that's how you have to feel about anything that you work on, really. That's why if you're with people that you love, you can make it really an incredible experience.
Yeah, and I think it stems back to that whole you have to believe in yourself before anyone else does.
I've worked on things that have been really successful and things that have been real big flops, but the flops were just as exciting to me as the successful ones.
And it was spent surrounded by good people that you love.
Always,
And
yeah,
what could you ask for?
exactly.
Deborah, thank you so much for sitting down and talking. It's been an absolute, absolute joy.
Thank you, honey. Thank you. It's lovely meeting you.
And that is it for my talk with Deborah. I, oh my God, there's something, especially, this is why the interviews are my favorite type of or style of content to create, right? There's just something about when someone gets going and starts talking about a project or a behind the scenes little moment. You can see the kind of light flicker behind their eyes, you know what I mean, when they're getting into it and they're remembering something or a story is brought up that they haven't thought about in years. I love it. I absolutely love it. So yeah, huge thank you to Deborah for sharing some of her time and her stories with us. I'll link all of Deborah's socials down below if you want to check her out online, give her a follow. And yeah, thank you guys so much for taking time out of your day for sitting and watching and listening to this. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something that you didn't know before going into it. And yeah, thank you so much for watching and I will talk to you all soon.